Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's Jmann. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm Jmann, and it's just me. And guess what? I'm pissed because I keep having to go on to Facebook and listen to people with their fucking lack of self-awareness about all the anger over the looting and fires and riots in the greater St. Paul, Minneapolis area the past few days. So, I guess I'm just going to pontificate on all of this because it's the only way I'm going to feel better about it. Everybody should know, because it's wall-to-wall news coverage, large portions of the Lake Street corridor, the Midway section of University Avenue in St. Paul, the Sunray Shopping Center in East St. Paul, 24 Targets have been shut down from either looting and fires or preventative measures to avoid similar outcomes as the other places I just mentioned. Other suburban shopping centers like Northtown Mall last night in Blaine had people surround it and try to break in by driving their car into Burlington Coat Factory, and other fucking stores just being broken into and raided and looted and pilfered and burned and destroyed. Multiple cities, and now the National Guard has been deployed. Way to go. And there's an 8 p.m. curfew all weekend in Minneapolis and St. Paul, if you haven't heard. That's what we get from all of this short-sighted, instant gratification type of protest. And I'm going to use that word with air quotes, protest. So to those who can't understand why people are so offended by the looting and destruction, and not more outraged solely by the death of George Floyd, I'm outraged by the death, but now I have to shift my focus to the crime that's being perpetrated in the name of, quote, justice. So we should just, stop focusing so much on the destruction? I wish that I fucking could, but because I have a social conscience, I'm furious about the stores that are burned down that were some innocent and uninvolved person's livelihood. How many people are out of work now because the stores that they worked at are now destroyed? How many shopping centers are trashed and looted? And for what? Short-term personal gain? They shut down the bus lines and the light rail over this shit. How many people depend on those modes of public transportation? And how many of those that I just mentioned do so for work? How many people take the bus or the light rail to work? Oh, but I suppose it's a moot point now because many of those same people are hourly waged, low-income earners. They're employed in the same stores and automotive shops and retail centers that are now in shambles. So, who gives a fuck, right? I guess we don't have to worry about that. They don't have to go anywhere. But can they pay their bills now? Can they earn a living? Will they have what they need? How long will it take to repair and replace the mercantile infrastructure that employs them? And, also supplies food and prescription medication and toiletries and personal care items to the surrounding neighborhood occupants. Do you think there's going to be this magical opening of eyes now that a bunch of opportunistic shitbags stole groceries and TVs and liquor and Air Jordans? Absolutely fucking not. And it's so goddamn short-sighted of anyone to think that it doesn't matter because they're mad a cop killed a man. Of course you're angry a cop killed a man, you dumb motherfucker. It's a travesty. But then how does that justify the destruction of entire neighborhood retail districts, which, by the way, are not all owned by big corporations with fat insurance policies to bail them out? It takes time to rebuild. All of that's going to go away for months. And we were already still just reopening society to recover from the first 2 months of coronavirus lockdown. And now this shit happens, and people have fewer places to procure the necessary items to continue staying home and reducing the spread of COVID-19. I wonder if any of these people out there walking the streets, fucking yucking it up with their phones out, acting like they're goddamn internet stars. Which, by the way, if you're filming civil unrest and you're not pointing the camera at what's going on, but you're pointing the camera at yourself while what's going on is in the background, you are a fucking douchebag. You are self-centered and idiotic. But more to my point, I wonder how many of these rioters and looters are going to end up sick with something that they contract while out tearing the town to shreds. You could say, why would you bring that up? I don't know. I guess personally I feel it would be like a form of karmic justice, in my opinion. And if you think the riots are the only way that the powers that be are going to listen, I hate to break it to you, but that isn't the only thing that state governments and police chiefs and city officials listen to. Peaceful protests, impassioned pleas, and votes, that's how they listen. Letters to your senators is how they listen. Occupations and loud voices is what makes them listen. Campaigning for political office to bring about change is how they listen. Uniting as one against a cause instead of being splintered into factions that have to stand on different sides of a moral line being drawn in the fucking sand. Your efforts are wasted. The moment that you start committing crimes in the name of progress, your voice is lost. It isn't only about one man. There have been hundreds. I get that. Enough is enough. It's time for a change. But it isn't only about that matter in and of itself. You're trying to show your passion and reserve for one cause while creating a whole nother litany of problems. And this isn't also only about systemic racism or police brutality. Neither of those are an overnight fix. It's now also about collateral damage to various communities and the lives that are now affected by senseless acts of thievery and vandalism. Like, it's still about George Floyd and the senseless death of people of color by the police, sure. But unfortunately, you're not winning over the popular vote by deciding that your destructive, air quotes, protest methods are how the change you seek is going to come about. How many people are sitting at home scared and unsure if it's going to happen in their towns this weekend? Instead of focusing on the reason that you're all so angry in the first place, they're worried. The media coverage is wall to wall with new images of civil unrest. And yes, it does send a message, but it's the wrong one. You can't make people care about your cause if the way that you bring attention to it is by tearing down other unrelated facets of the community. Imagine if you had a neighbor who leaves garbage on their lawn and has non-functional cars in their yard. Instead of complaining to the city or banding together with a few other neighbors to kind of help clean it up and make a positive impact and maybe unite the people on the street. No, you decide, I think I'm going to burn this bitch down. Okay, but in the process, your neighbor in this hypothetical scenario might get the message, sure, but you've also now destroyed his home. And what if you found out that his kids were inside and they died from it? Or now his family doesn't have a place to live? That's a secondary side effect of your narrow-minded, instant gratification, short-sighted form of raging against the machine. What if you found out your wife was fucking around on you? You'd be miserable and furious, right? But instead of talking to a lawyer and getting a divorce, you decide, I'm going to burn all her clothes and destroy her car. That'll teach that bitch. I guess it will, but in the process, you're committing a crime. Two wrongs don't make a right. You're not affecting change. You're just taking one problem and throwing another problem at it and expecting it to morph into a fucking solution. That's not how this shit works. You burn the 3rd Precinct office building down, and that might send a message to the police that it's time for them to pay closer attention to checking themselves within their ranks when situations like what happened to George Floyd go down, right? But the methods that you're using to send that message is considered domestic terrorism. And you're expecting it to build a bridge across the divide in philosophies. That's not going to fucking happen. If that's how you think you get what you want, is by bullying people into falling in line with you, that is a form of fascism. Which, by the way, I'm pretty sure ridding ourselves of crooked and violent cops instead of entire police forces in general is the way to go, right? Yes, obviously. We weed out the bad ones. But we don't fucking destroy society in the process. You can say, oh, we don't need the police, though. We'll handle it. How many of you have the actual resolve to put together a neighborhood militia to keep other people in the neighborhood in check? It just becomes like The Walking Dead with warring factions. When the police have no control or presence, you get the very thing that is happening now. Anarchy in the streets. So focus on this one cop that was kneeling on his neck, and obviously shit on the other three. They're going to get theirs too, but don't fucking punish the entire city and fuck up portions of the neighborhood or entire communities to prove your point, because it's not doing anything. It might just be like looting and fires to you, but what happens when the same morally bankrupt pieces of shit who did all the burning and stealing decide they want to go full purge and kill some people and commit a rape? Because it will happen. That's how these things get. They snowball. They get worse. It's the mob mentality. And when people think they're not being watched, that's when the real ugliness of humanity comes out. Say what you want about people being inherently good. I don't buy that shit. Human beings are disgusting and we're like ants. That's why you see video of dozens of them breaking into the Target at Lake and Minnehaha and coming out with TVs and shit. And they're like, there's no cops in there. Steal this motherfucker blind. You're just collecting shit mindlessly. Short-term gain. It's not helping you beat police brutality whatsoever. And how ironic is it that you think that you can get back at the cops for killing black men or people of color by committing crime? I don't get how you think that those two concepts are parallel. They're fucking not. And saying that there could be murder and rape in addition to the thievery and otherwise anarchic efforts that are going on out there, it's like the fucking PS2 game, State of Emergency, if you ever played it. If you haven't, watch some videos. That's what it's like. And these are not over-dramatic sets of examples, because the very destruction that's going on now is what a large portion of people would partake in if we had no police. Tell yourself it wouldn't go down that way. But I think more than enough of them have proven their true colors and what they're really all about. Many people thought it was going to happen at the onset of the shelter-in-place orders and all the mass panic to buy shit up, and thankfully it didn't. But I'm an anti-gun guy, and last night I slept next to a loaded shotgun because I watched the news for hours and went, Jesus Christ, it's not centralized to the main big twin cities. It's going outward towards the burbs. It's going into areas that are unrelated. They're just doing this with reckless abandon and no consideration for who ends up hurt or victimized in the process. And I didn't have that gun to protect me from being murdered by the police. That's for damn sure. It was me worried that, well, the shit could be hitting the fan, and it really doesn't take much for all of society to fall. Let that sink into your brain, because it's the truth. So let I Can't Breathe and Justice for George continue to be your battle cry. But don't think you're going to cull favor with the masses by burning neighborhoods to the ground after robbing them blind. Interact with the show at What Do We Call It? That is at What Do We Call It? You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/What Do We Call It? Podcast show. For the What Do We Call It? Podcast, I'm Jmann. And that's the end.
Overnight in Minneapolis, police firing tear gas while protesters threw rocks. Businesses were looted.
Coming up on the Aldi grocery store.
Fires set.
Here, this whole city block here has been a hot spot all day. East Lake Street, Minnehaha, and they're right there. They're starting to. We're gonna move back. They're starting to throw Molotov cocktails. We're going.
Video from above shows the Minneapolis police precinct burning as protesters surrounded the empty building.
The aftermath of a night of rioting and looting. Minneapolis neighbourhoods left in ruins. Buildings burnt to the ground, shopfronts vandalised and ransacked. Protests raged here into the early hours of the morning as this community took their fury to the streets.
We must restore the peace so that we can do this hard work together.